The silent birthday, Keanu Reeves sat quietly in his home on the morning of his birthday. The world outside celebrated him in headlines, with fans writing endless wishes. But inside his heart, there was silence. Birthdays had never been easy for him. They reminded him of all the years gone by, of people he had lost, of memories he wished he could touch again, but never would. Still, he smiled at the thought of his fans, at the thought of strangers sending him love when they did not know, his pain. He had learned to live with this balance of joy and sorrow, light and shadow. The phone rang many times that morning. Some were colleagues, some were distant friends. They wished him well, but their words felt formal, like polite greetings carried through wires. Keanu thanked them, but once he put the phone down, the room returned to its quiet emptiness. He poured himself coffee, sat by the window, and watched the light move across the sky. He thought, maybe this year will pass just like the others. Maybe it will be simple. Nothing more. But far away, Sandra Bullock was making plans. She had known Keanu for decades. They had worked together, laughed together, and in moments of life's heaviness, they had stood side by side. She remembered the first time she saw him truly smile, not the polite smile for cameras, but the deep, genuine one that reached his eyes. She wanted to see that smile again. She knew birthdays were hard for him, but she also knew that sometimes the right kind of surprise could touch the heart in a way no words could. As Keanu sat with his quiet thoughts, he heard a soft knock on the door. It was unusual because very few people came without notice. He walked slowly, wondering who it might be. When he opened the door, there was Sandra, holding a simple box in her hands. No cameras, no press, no grand display, just her, standing there with that warm, familiar smile. "Happy birthday," she said, her voice soft but filled with a kind of energy that seemed to push away the silence in the room. Keanu was surprised. He had not expected anyone, least of all her. But he welcomed her in, and for the first time that morning, he felt the weight on his heart lift just a little. Inside, the box was not a luxury gift, not something expensive. Instead, it was filled with handwritten letters from people he had helped quietly over the years. Sandra had searched, reached out, and gathered words from strangers who carried gratitude for him. One letter was from a crew member on a film who remembered the day Keanu gave up his seat on a bus. Another was from a young actor who remembered Keanu's encouragement when he was about to quit. There were stories from people who had no fame, no power, but had felt seen because of his kindness. Keanu sat still as he read the first few letters. His eyes grew wet, though he tried to blink it away. These were not birthday wishes from fans who loved his movies. These were voices of people whose lives he had touched, unknowingly, quietly. He looked up at Sandra, unsure how to speak. She simply said, "You deserve to be reminded of the good you bring into this world." Today is not about counting years. It is about remembering the lives you have changed. The room no longer felt empty. The silence was gone, replaced by a deep warmth. For the first time in many years, Keanu felt that maybe his birthday was not just another reminder of what he had lost, but also of what he had given. And yet, he did not know that this was only the beginning. What Sandra had planned was far more than a box of letters. Her kindness would lead him on a journey through memories, friendships, and truths he had long buried. What started as a quiet birthday morning was about to become something unforgettable, something that would change the way he looked at his own life. The letters of hidden kindness. Keanu placed the box of letters gently on the table, almost as if it was something fragile, something sacred. He looked at Sandra, then back at the box, still struggling to find the right words. Birthdays had always been heavy, but now he felt a different kind of weight, one that came not from sadness, but from overwhelming emotion. Sandra sat across from him sipping the coffee he offered. She did not speak much. She just let him open letter after letter. Every page carried a different story, yet all of them were connected by the same thread. His quiet kindness. One letter was from a driver who had once worked on a film set. The man wrote that his car had broken down late at night and everyone had gone home. He had no one to call and he stood alone by the road. Then Keanu, who had just wrapped a long day of filming, stopped his own car and stayed with him until help arrived. The driver wrote, "You could have driven away like everyone else, but you stayed, and you spoke to me like I mattered. I will never forget that night." Keanu paused after reading it. He tried to recall that night and faint memories surfaced, but he had never thought much of it. To him, it was just something natural, something small. But to that man, it was life-changing. Another letter was from a woman who had been a single mother working in a small diner. She wrote about the day Keanu came in quietly, ordered a simple meal, and left a tip large enough to cover her rent. She never saw him again, but that tip gave her and her child safety for one more month. "You will never know what that money meant to me," she wrote, "but it saved me from losing my home." As Keanu read these words, his throat tightened. He could almost see her face, tired but grateful, and it made his chest ache. He looked at Sandra, who was watching him closely. "Why did you do this?" he finally asked. Sandra leaned forward, her voice calm and gentle. "Because you forget, Keanu. You forget how much you matter. You always carry the pain, but you rarely hold on to the joy you give others. I wanted you to see yourself the way the world sees you, not as an actor, not as a star, but as a man who has made lives brighter." Keanu lowered his head. For years he had lived with quiet humility, never seeking recognition, never expecting thanks. But now, as these stories unfolded, he felt his heart open in a way it hadn't in years. Then Sandra reached into her bag and pulled out another envelope, larger than the others. She handed it to him and said, "This one is special." He opened it slowly. Inside was a photograph, old and slightly faded, of the two of them together on the set of their first film. Attached to it was a handwritten note, not from a stranger, but from Sandra herself. She had written, "I remember the days when I was scared, unsure if I belonged in this world of cameras and fame. But you always made me feel safe. You reminded me to stay real, to stay grounded. Keanu, you never let me forget that kindness is stronger than fame. I owe much of who I am today to you." His eyes blurred with tears as he held the letter close. He had not expected her to speak so openly. For a moment. Silence filled the room again, but this silence was different from the one in the morning. It was warm, almost sacred. Then Sandra smiled softly and said, "This is only the first part of your birthday. I have something else planned, but you'll have to trust me." Keanu raised an eyebrow, curious but also cautious. He had never been the type to enjoy surprises, yet the sincerity in her eyes made him nod. "Where are we going?" he asked. She only answered with a playful smile. "You'll see." Little did he know, the journey Sandra had prepared would take him back through moments he had locked away in his heart. Moments of joy, of loss, of resilience. And with each step, he would discover that his story was not only about pain, but about the powerful beauty of human connection. The road of memories. Keanu stepped out of his home with Sandra by his side. The air was fresh, the sun was soft, and the world seemed quieter than usual. He still did not know where she was taking him, but the mystery felt less like a burden and more like a gift. Sandra carried with her a calm energy, and somehow he trusted that whatever she had planned would mean something important. As they drove through the streets, Keanu watched the city move past the window. Tall buildings, small shops, and people, lost in their own lives. He thought of how many times he had walked among them without being noticed. He liked it that way. Simple, unassuming, unseen. But today was different. Today, someone had chosen to make him visible, not as a star, but as a human being. Sandra's car finally stopped in front of a quiet theater. It was not a grand Hollywood hall, not a place of glamour. It was a small, old theater, the kind that smelled of dust and memories. Keanu looked at her, puzzled, and asked, "Why here?" She smiled. "Because this is where your story began." Keanu's eyes softened. He remembered it now. This was one of the first theaters where his earliest films had been shown, a place where he had once stood nervously in the shadows, hoping the audience would accept him. Inside comma. The theater was dark, the seats empty. Sandra guided him to the middle row. Then the screen lit up. It was not a new film, not something recent. It was a reel of his earliest moments, scenes from auditions, behind-the-scenes clips, and even interviews from decades ago. Keanu watched his younger self appear on the screen. He saw the innocence in his eyes, the quiet determination, the hunger to prove himself. He heard his own voice, softer, less certain, but filled with hope. "You were just a boy then," Sandra whispered. "But you carried something rare even at that age. You carried truth." Keanu stayed silent, his chest heavy. The screen then shifted from his own clips to messages recorded by old friends, directors, and co-stars. One after another they shared small stories, times he had encouraged them, times he had stood beside them when no one else did. One director said, "I remember when the studio wanted to replace me. Keanu stood up for me. He said, 'If he goes, I go.' And because of that, I stayed, and my career survived. I owe him everything." An actress shared, "I was nervous on my first day. I kept messing up lines. Keanu whispered to me, 'You're doing fine. Don't worry.' That one moment of kindness kept me from giving up." Keanu leaned back in his seat, overwhelmed. It was strange to see his life reflected this way, not through awards or fame, but through moments of compassion. Sandra reached out and placed her hand gently on his arm. "You've spent so much time mourning what you lost, Keanu. But look at what you gave. Look at the lives you carried forward without even knowing." He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to hold back the tears, but they came anyway, quiet and unstoppable. When the reel ended, the theater went dark again. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, yet it was filled with meaning. Then Sandra broke it softly. "This was the past, but there is still more. Today is not just about memory. It is about discovery." Keanu turned to her, his voice unsteady. "What else are you hiding from me?" She smiled gently. "Only something that will show you that even in the darkest times, the light you gave others always came back to you. You just never noticed it." As they left the theater, Keanu felt something shift inside him. His birthday was no longer just a reminder of pain. It was slowly turning into a mirror, showing him the truth he had long refused to see, that even through his quiet suffering, he had lived a life of deep meaning. But Sandra's plan was far from over. The next place she would take him held a surprise so personal, so unexpected, that it would break open the last walls he kept around his heart. The hidden gift. The drive after the theater was quiet. Keanu sat beside Sandra, his thoughts heavy but warm. He kept replaying the faces he had just seen on the screen, the voices of people he had helped without even realizing how deeply it mattered. For years, he had carried his own grief like a silent companion. Now, for the first time, he felt that maybe his life had not only been about loss. Maybe it had also been about lifting others. Sandra glanced at him and smiled. "You're too Quiet, she said softly. Keanu let out a small laugh. I don't know what to say. I never thought of myself this way. All I ever did was what felt right in the moment. And that's exactly why it mattered, she replied. The car stopped, in front of a small house, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. It looked ordinary, almost hidden, with a small garden at the front. Keanu frowned slightly. Who lives here? Sandra turned to him. Someone who has been waiting a long time to thank you. His chest tightened. He followed her to the door, unsure of what to expect. Sandra knocked gently, and after a few moments, the door opened. A young woman stood there holding a child in her arms. She looked at Keanu with wide eyes as though she could not believe he was standing in front of her. Do you remember me? She asked hesitantly. Keanu searched her face, but he could not place her. She smiled softly, sensing his confusion. Many years ago, I worked at a diner. I was the woman you left a big tip for. It saved my home. Keanu froze, his eyes widening. The letter, the one he had read earlier in the morning. This was her. She invited them in, her little child clutching at her shoulder. The house was small but filled with warmth. Toys scattered the floor, and the walls carried photos of family moments. As they sat down, the woman placed her child gently on the couch. I wanted to tell you this in person, she said. That tip was more than money. It gave me one more month to breathe. It gave me time to find another job. It gave me the chance to keep my child safe. And because of that, everything you see in this house became possible. Keanu felt his throat tighten again. He looked at the child, who stared back with innocent curiosity. This is Mia, the woman continued. She would not be growing up here if not for you. She may never know what you did, but I will never forget. Keanu lowered his head, overwhelmed by emotions he could not put into words. He had thought that moment was small, something he would never even remember. Yet here was proof that it had changed the course of an entire life. The woman reached across the table and gently placed her hand over his. You gave us hope when we had none, and that is something no one can ever measure. Sandra watched, quietly, her eyes shining with emotion. She had seen Keanu on screen many times, but this was the most real version of him she had ever known. Vulnerable, humbled, and deeply human. After a while, they left the house. Keanu walked slowly toward the car, his steps heavy with thought. When they sat inside, he finally whispered, I don't deserve all this. I was just doing what anyone should do. Sandra shook her head gently. But most people don't, Keanu. That's the difference. You don't see your own worth because you never acted for recognition. You acted because kindness is who you are. The car ride was silent again, but inside him, something was shifting. For so long, he had lived with the shadows of his past. But now, piece by piece, Sandra was showing him that his light had always been stronger. And yet, she was still not finished. The next part of her plan would bring him face to face with the one memory he had avoided for years. The memory of love, loss, and the strength that comes when someone else helps you carry it. The memory of love. The sky had started to change, colors as the evening slowly approached. Keanu sat quietly in the car, his mind full of the faces he had seen, the voices he had heard, and the truth he was beginning to accept. Sandra drove with calm focus, her silence saying more than words. After some time, the car turned into a narrow road lined with tall trees. The world outside grew quieter, almost like the air itself knew what was coming. Finally, they stopped near a small garden filled with white flowers. Keanu looked at Sandra with a puzzled expression. Why are we here? He asked softly. Sandra took a deep breath. Because there's someone you need to remember. Someone you've kept in your heart, but pushed away because the pain was too much. Keanu's heart sank. He knew even before she said more. This place, this silence. It brought back memories of Jennifer, the woman he had loved and lost. The one whose absence had shaped so much of his quiet sadness. He froze, his hands tightening. Sandra, I don't think I can do this. She placed her hand gently on his arm. I know it hurts. But today is not only about remembering your kindness to others. It is about remembering that even in your pain, love never left you. It lived on in the way you touched lives. You need to see that connection. For a long moment, Keanu did not move. The memories were heavy, pressing against his chest. But slowly, with Sandra by his side, he stepped into the garden. The place was quiet, filled with the soft fragrance of flowers. There was a small bench, and he sat down, his eyes lost in the distance. Sandra remained beside him, giving him space. But never leaving after a while, Sandra spoke. Jennifer may not be here, but the love you shared never disappeared. It's in the way you still show kindness. It's in the way you carry compassion for strangers. Grief may have taken her from your days, but love shaped your soul forever. Keanu closed his eyes. He could almost hear Jennifer's laughter, soft and free. He remembered the way she used to smile when he said something silly, the way her presence filled even the darkest days with light. His chest ached, but for the first time, it was not only pain, it was also gratitude. Gratitude that he had once known such love, even if it was brief. Sandra watched him silently, her own heart heavy with respect. She knew this was the hardest part of the day, but also the most important. Keanu finally whispered, his voice breaking, I still miss her every day. Sandra placed her hand over his and whispered back, and you always will. But missing her does not mean you are broken. It means you are human. It means you loved deeply, and that love still guides you. A tear slipped down Keanu's face, but he did not hide it. He let it fall because for once, he felt safe to show the truth. As the sun dipped lower, the garden glowed with soft, golden light. Keanu looked around, breathing in the quiet beauty, and whispered, Thank you. He wasn't sure if he was thanking Sandra, the garden, or Jennifer's memory. Maybe all three. Sandra smiled gently. This was the hardest part, Keanu, but you faced it. And now, there is one last step, one final place to go. When we get there, you'll see the whole picture. You'll see that your life has been far more than sorrow. It has been a story of resilience, kindness, and endless love. Keanu nodded slowly. His heart was heavy, but it was also lighter than it had been in years. He did not know what awaited him next, but he trusted Sandra. For the first time in a long time, he felt that maybe his birthday was not something to endure, but something to accept. A reminder that even through grief, life still carried meaning. The circle of gratitude. The drive after the garden was quiet, but this time the silence did not weigh Keanu down. It was not the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of reflection. He had faced his memories. He had touched his grief, and he had felt the love that still lived in him. Sandra drove calmly, her eyes fixed on the road, yet her presence kept him steady. Finally, They arrived at a community hall. From the outside, it looked ordinary. Plain walls, simple windows, nothing that spoke of grandeur. Keanu frowned slightly, confused. Why here? He asked. Sandra only smiled. This is the last part of your gift. Come inside. Keanu followed her into the hall. As the door opened, he froze. The room was filled with people, some familiar, some strangers, but each face lit up when they saw him. Applause broke out, not the loud, staged applause of Hollywood events, but the warm, heartfelt clapping of people whose lives had been touched by him. Keanu stood still, Overwhelmed. One by one, people began to step forward. The driver he had once helped on the roadside, the woman from the diner with her child, old co-stars, and crew members who had worked quietly behind the scenes. They all came together, forming a circle of gratitude around him. A young man approached first. "Years ago, you stopped to talk to me when I was just a fan waiting outside a studio. You didn't rush past me, you asked about my dreams. That moment gave me courage. Today, I am a filmmaker. And it started with your kindness." Then an older woman came forward. "My son worked with you once. He told me how respectful you were to everyone on set, from the stars to the workers carrying equipment. That respect inspired him. He passed away some years ago, but before he did, he always said, 'Keanu Reeves treated me like I mattered.'" Tears filled Keanu's eyes as he listened. He could not speak. His voice locked inside his chest. Sandra stepped beside him and whispered, "This is the truth you never allowed yourself to see. All your pain, all your quiet years, you thought you were invisible. But look around you." "Keanu, you are not invisible. You are unforgettable." One by one, more stories filled the room. Some were small acts, a smile, a kind word, a moment of patience. Others were larger. Times when he had given money to strangers in need, stood up for colleagues, or protected someone from being treated unfairly. To Keanu, they had always been small choices, natural responses. But to others, they had been turning points. Finally, a little girl stepped forward, Mia, the daughter of the woman from the diner. She walked up shyly, holding a small drawing in her hand. It was a simple sketch of a man with a gentle smile standing beside a child. She handed it to Keanu and whispered, "Thank you for helping my mommy." Keanu's hands trembled as he held the drawing. It was not just paper. It was a symbol of everything he had never realized. The applause began again, soft but steady. Keanu looked around, his heart full, his eyes wet. He finally spoke, his voice low and breaking. "I don't know what to say. I never did any of this to be remembered. I just tried to do what felt right." Sandra smiled warmly. "And that is why it mattered." In that moment, Keanu understood something he had never truly allowed himself to believe, that even in his quiet grief, even in his loneliness, his life had been meaningful. Not because of fame, not because of movies, but because of kindness. As the evening light poured through the windows of the hall, Keanu felt something shift deep inside him. The weight he had carried for years was not gone, but it was lighter. He was not only the man who had lost, he was also the man who had given. And though he did not know what tomorrow would bring, for the first time in many birthdays, he felt peace. Yet Sandra had one final surprise, one last truth waiting to close the circle. The birthday that became a lesson. The hall slowly grew quiet again as the people sat down, leaving Keanu standing in the center. He still held the little girl's drawing in his hands, his heart trembling from everything he had heard. He looked around the room at all the faces shining with gratitude, and for once, he did not feel like a shadow. He felt seen. Sandra stepped forward, smiling softly. "This is your birthday, Keanu. Not the kind filled with noise, but the kind filled with truth. You always feared these days because you thought they would remind you of loss. But today, I wanted to remind you of love. Love that never left. Love that keeps circling back to you through the people you touched." Keanu's eyes blurred as he nodded slowly. "I don't know how to thank you, Sandra. You gave me more than a birthday gift. You gave me back a piece of myself." She shook her head gently. "You gave yourself back. All I did was hold up the mirror." The room clapped once more, and this time Keanu did not shrink away. He allowed himself to smile, a real smile that reached his eyes, the kind Sandra had wanted to see again. Then. Sandra raised her voice so everyone could hear. We celebrate not just a birthday today. We celebrate a man who reminds us all that kindness is never wasted, that resilience is built in silence, and that humility can be the loudest strength. People nodded, some with tears, some with joy. After the gathering ended, when most had left, Keanu and Sandra stepped outside. The evening sky was painted with stars, and the air was cool and gentle. They walked slowly, not needing many words. Keanu finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. You know, I used to think birthdays were only about counting what I had lost. But today showed me they can also be about remembering what I gave and what I still have. Sandra smiled, her eyes warm. And that is the truth I wanted you to see. You carry pain, yes, but you also carry hope for so many people. That is what makes your story magical. They stood under the night sky for a long moment, both silent, both content. Keanu took a deep breath. For the first time in many years, he felt at peace with his birthday. It was no longer just a date on the calendar that carried sorrow. It had become a lesson, a reminder that even through suffering, his life had been full of meaning. As they walked away together, Keanu whispered almost to himself, maybe this is what happiness feels like. Not loud, not shining, but quiet and real. Sandra heard him and nodded softly. Yes, Keanu, this is happiness. And with that, the day that began in silence ended with light. His birthday had not just been another year. It had become a chapter of healing, kindness, and truth. A story not only for him, but for everyone who believed that even the smallest acts of love can turn into the greatest miracles.